I'm 78 years old, and sleep doesn't come easy anymore. You drift in and out, like you're floating just above your own body. That night, I was lying in the guest room at my daughter's house, the door cracked, the hallway light spilling across the carpet. I hadn't been asleep at all. I was just still, breathing slow. That's when I heard their voices. At first, I thought it was the television. Then I heard my son's laugh, low and careful, the one he uses when he thinks he's being practical. My daughter answered him, quieter, sharper. They were standing in the kitchen, maybe 10 feet from where I lay, talking like accountants. Like I wasn't a man who raised them, but a problem they were solving. Well, the house should be sold, my son said. Split 3 ways. That's fair. And Dad's savings, my daughter replied. We'll need to move that fast before medical bills eat it up. They spoke gently, almost kindly. That was the strange part. No anger. No sadness. Just planning. Like I was already gone. I remember staring at the ceiling fan, watching it turn, thinking about how I taught my son to ride a bike on a cracked sidewalk, how my daughter used to fall asleep on my chest during Sunday football games. I remembered scraping by after their mother died, working late, eating cold dinners, telling myself it was worth it. All of it. Every tired bone. My son said my name then. Not loud. Just enough. He won't know. He's out of it most days anyway. I wanted to sit up. I wanted to cough, to let them know I was still here. But something held me still. Maybe shock. Maybe curiosity. Maybe the need to hear the truth all the way through. My daughter sighed. We just need to be smart about it. Smart. That word stayed with me. They went to bed not long after. Doors closed. Lights off. The house went quiet again. I lay there until morning, eyes open, heart steady in a way that surprised me. Because somewhere in that long night, listening to my children divide my life into pieces, I understood something very clearly, and once you understand a thing like that, you don't forget it. I got up before they did. That's another thing age gives you, mornings that arrive whether you invite them or not. I sat at the small kitchen table with a cup of coffee my daughter had set up the night before, grounds already measured, like I was a guest who needed instructions. My hands shook a little, but my mind was clear. Clear in a way it hadn't been in years. When they came in, they both smiled too quickly. My daughter asked how I slept. My son asked if my back was bothering me. They spoke slow and loud, like I'd crossed some invisible line while no one was looking. I told them I slept fine. That part wasn't a lie. I had slept fine after the truth finished settling in. We ate eggs in silence. I watched them avoid each other's eyes, watched the careful way they moved around me. Every sound felt louder than it should have. The clink of a fork. The hum of the refrigerator. I wondered how long they'd been having those conversations. Weeks? Months? Years? After breakfast, my daughter suggested I rest. My son said he'd take care of the bills when the time comes. I nodded, thanked them both, and went back to the guest room. I closed the door and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my shoes lined up neatly against the wall. Brown leather. Scuffed toes. Shoes I bought myself, with money I earned, from a life I lived. I thought about my wife then. How she used to say, don't confuse being quiet with being unaware. She'd been gone 12 years, but I could hear her voice plain as day. If she were alive, this wouldn't have happened. Or maybe it still would have, just more politely. That afternoon, while they were out running errands, I made a phone call. Just one. I asked questions about things I should have asked years ago. Accounts. Beneficiaries. Paperwork with my name on it that I'd stopped reading closely because I trusted the people around me. When they came home, I acted the same as always. Ate dinner. Watched the news. Smiled when appropriate. That night, lying in the dark again, I didn't pretend to sleep. I listened. This time, there were no voices. Just the steady quiet of a house that thought it had already won. And that was when I decided I wouldn't say a word until I was ready to say everything. I left the house 2 days later. I told them I wanted to visit an old friend from church, which wasn't exactly true, but it wasn't exactly a lie either. What I really wanted was space. Space to hear my own thoughts without them being rearranged by someone else's expectations. My daughter packed me a lunch I didn't need. My son reminded me to call if I got confused. I thanked them both and carried my own bag to the car. I drove slower than I used to, hands steady on the wheel, every familiar street looking slightly different now that I was paying attention. I ended up at a small motel just outside town, the kind with doors that open to the parking lot and curtains that smell faintly of detergent. I paid cash. That mattered to me for reasons I didn't fully understand yet. That first night alone felt strange. Quiet, but not empty. I sat on the edge of the bed and went through a folder I'd brought from home, papers I hadn't touched since my wife was alive. Deeds. Statements. Old insurance forms with outdated addresses. I realized how much of my life I'd put on autopilot, assuming the people closest to me would look out for my interests the way I once looked out for theirs. I wasn't angry. Not yet. I was disappointed in a way that felt heavier than anger. Like carrying a bucket of water you can't set down without spilling something important. The next morning, I made more calls. Calm ones. Careful ones. I listened more than I spoke. Each answer confirmed what I'd started to suspect. Decisions had been made without me. Assumptions layered on top of assumptions, all built on the idea that I was already fading. That afternoon, my son called. Asked where I was. I told him I was fine. He asked if I needed help. I said no. There was a long pause, the kind where someone is deciding what version of themselves to present next. He settled on concern. It sounded practiced. After we hung up, I sat by the window and watched cars pass, each one carrying someone who assumed tomorrow was theirs. I didn't feel scared. I felt awake. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't being managed. I was being responsible again. And that realization, quiet as it was, changed the shape of everything that came after. The lawyer's office was smaller than I expected. Beige walls, a ticking clock, framed certificates that looked older than my grandchildren. I'd known him for years, mostly through my wife, and he didn't speak to me like I was fragile. That alone felt like respect. He asked why I was there. I told him the truth, or at least the part one was ready to say. I told him I'd overheard some things. I told him I wanted to understand my options. He didn't interrupt. He just nodded and took notes, the scratch of his pen steady and patient. We went through everything slowly. My will. The house. Accounts I hadn't checked myself in too long. He explained what could be changed and what couldn't, and how easily good intentions turn into quiet control if you don't stay involved. I felt embarrassed, but he didn't let me sit in that feeling for long. He said, "This happens more than you think," and I believed him. When I left, I sat in my car for a while before starting the engine. I rested my hands on the steering wheel and stared out at the parking lot, at people coming and going with folders tucked under their arms. I wasn't undoing my children. I wasn't punishing them. I was correcting something that had drifted too far without my permission. That evening, my daughter called. Her voice was sweet, careful. She asked when I was coming back. I said I wasn't sure. She asked if something was wrong. I said no, not wrong, just different. She didn't like that answer. I could hear it in the way her breathing changed. Later, my son texted. Just one line. "Everything okay?" I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. "Yes," I wrote. I'm taking care of things. I slept better that night than I had in years. Not because the situation was resolved, but because I was no longer pretending it wasn't happening. There's a deep rest that comes from standing back up inside yourself, even if your legs shake a little at first. By morning, I knew this wasn't going to be a quiet ending. But it was going to be an honest one, and at my age, honesty feels like the last real luxury you're ever given. I didn't go back right away. I stayed another few days at that motel, settling into a rhythm that reminded me of who I was before I became someone's responsibility. I woke early, walked a little, read the paper cover to cover instead of skimming headlines. I ate when I was hungry, not when someone reminded me. Those small freedoms added up faster than I expected. My daughter called twice more. Each time her voice carried a new edge. Worry mixed with irritation. She asked if I'd talked to anyone. I said yes. She asked who. I said professionals. That word landed hard between us. She went quiet, then said she was just trying to help. I told her I knew that. It was the truth. It just wasn't the whole truth anymore. My son came next. He didn't bother with softness. He asked if I was changing things. I asked what things. He sighed, the way he used to when he was a teenager caught doing something careless. "Dad, we're just trying to plan," he said. "You don't have to make this difficult." I told him I wasn't trying to make anything difficult. I was trying to be present. That conversation stayed with me. Not because of what he said, but because of what he didn't. He never asked how I felt. Not once. He only asked what I was doing. On the fourth day, I went back to my house. Not theirs. Mine. The place I'd lived in for over 40 years. I unlocked the door and stood there a moment, breathing in the familiar smell of old books and lemon cleaner. Everything was where I'd left it. Chair by the window. Clock on the wall ticking like it always had. Proof that I still existed outside their narrative. I sat at my desk and pulled out a yellow legal pad. I wrote things down slowly, carefully. Not demands. Not threats. Just facts. What I wanted. What I would no longer accept. It felt strange, putting boundaries on paper at my age, but it also felt necessary, like finally installing a lock on a door that had been wide open too long. That evening, I cooked myself a simple dinner and ate it standing at the counter, the way I used to when the kids were young and life was loud. I wasn't sad. I wasn't relieved either. I was steady. And for the first time since that night I pretended to sleep, I knew I was ready for the conversation that was coming. I invited them over the following Sunday. I didn't explain why. I just said I wanted to talk, and that seemed to worry them more than any accusation could have. They arrived together, standing on my porch like guests instead of children. My daughter brought muffins. My son checked his phone twice before sitting down. We didn't start right away. I poured coffee. We talked about the weather, the price of groceries, nothing that mattered. I let the silence stretch until it grew uncomfortable, because some conversations need that space to breathe. Then I told them what I'd heard. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I just said the words plainly, the way they'd spoken them themselves. I watched their faces change as the meaning landed. My daughter went pale. My son stared at the table like it might open up and save him. My daughter said it wasn't like that. My son said they were only being realistic. They both said they didn't think I'd understand. That last part hurt more than the rest, but I nodded anyway. Understanding doesn't always mean agreeing. I told them I wasn't angry. I told them I was disappointed. That word finally slowed them down. I explained that I wasn't done living, and I wasn't ready to be divided up like furniture. I said I'd made changes. Necessary ones. Not to punish them, but to protect myself. My son asked what kind of changes. I told him that some decisions would now require my consent again. That certain assumptions were no longer valid. My daughter's eyes filled with tears, but they weren't the kind that come from remorse. They came from losing control. I ended the conversation before it could turn into an argument. I told them I loved them. That part was true. I also told them love doesn't cancel out respect. That part was new. They left quietly. No shouting. No slammed doors. Just the sound of their car pulling away, tires crunching on gravel. I stood at the window long after they were gone, feeling older than I had that morning, but lighter too. Some truths don't break families all at once. They just change the shape of what's left. The weeks after that were quieter than I expected. Not peaceful, exactly, but thinner, like the air after a storm. My daughter called less. When she did, her words were careful, measured, like she was stepping around something fragile. My son switched to texts. Short ones. Informational. No warmth, but no anger either. I spent more time alone, and that wasn't as frightening as people like to think. I fixed a loose hinge on the back door. I sorted through old boxes in the garage, things I'd kept without knowing why. School papers. A cracked Little League trophy. My wife's handwriting on recipe cards, soft and slanted. I let myself feel the weight of those years without rushing past them. There were moments of doubt. Late at night, mostly. I'd sit in my chair and wonder if I'd done the right thing, if this was how fathers were supposed to age, drawing lines instead of drawing people close. But every time that thought surfaced, I remembered their voices in the kitchen, calm and certain, deciding things that still belonged to me. One afternoon, my granddaughter stopped by alone. She's 19 now, tall and awkward in the way young adults are when they haven't settled into themselves yet. She hugged me longer than usual. Said her parents worked stressed. I told her adults get that way when they forget how to listen. She smiled like she understood more than she let on. Before she left, she said, "I'm glad you're doing what you want, Grandpa." That sentence stayed with me. Not because it excused anything, but because it reminded me that someone was watching, learning what it looks like to stand up without becoming hard. I'm not naive. I know this isn't over. Time has a way of reopening conversations you thought were finished. But I also know something else now. I don't owe anyone my silence just because they're used to it. I still love my children. I probably always will. Love doesn't disappear just because clarity arrives. But love, real love, has room for truth, even when that truth makes the room feel smaller. And at this stage of my life, smaller rooms are easier to keep honest. The last thing I did was simple. I rewrote my days. Not my will, not my accounts, not the paperwork everyone seems to care about. I rewrote how I lived. I stopped waiting for the phone to ring. I stopped explaining myself before anyone asked. I started saying no without adding a reason afterward, and yes only when I meant it. My children came around eventually, one at a time. Polite. Careful. We talked about ordinary things. The distance didn't vanish, but it softened into something manageable. I learned that closeness built on fear isn't closeness at all. It's just proximity with conditions. Some nights, I still wake up early, listening to the quiet. But it's a different kind of quiet now. Not the kind where you pretend to be asleep so you don't hear the truth. The kind where you've already heard it, accepted it, and decided who you're going to be anyway. I don't regret overhearing that conversation. It hurt, yes. It rearranged things I thought were permanent. But it also gave me back something I didn't realize I'd lost. My voice. My authority over my own ending. If there's one thing I've learned this late in life, it's that dignity doesn't come from being needed. It comes from being seen, and when you're not, from seeing yourself clearly enough to stand. I'm still here. Still thinking. Still choosing. And no one is dividing my life anymore.